This one's for the new morphology students. Morphology, literally meaning the study of shapes, but specifically the shape of words. And so the biggest thing to get used to at the beginning of morphology is this idea of dividing words up into their pieces. Morphemes, this idea of, it's like I like to call it a wordlet. It's like a mini word, or the smallest piece of a word that actually can stand on its own with some kind of a meaning. The smallest unit of meaning. That's the idea of a morpheme. So we take a word, and some words have just one morpheme, but some of them can have many. And so how do we slice words? That's like the first thing to get used to. All right, so we take a word like cat, and yes, to be precise, remember to always think about how it is spelled phonetically, although you don't always have to worry about this in morphology. So like often they just get away with just writing the letters, but keep in mind that what really matters is the sounds. And so sometimes the spelling can cause some confusion when words don't behave the way their letters would seem to suggest they should. But in any case, let's look at the next word, which is cats. Okay, so here we have, this word is now something that can be broken down into two pieces. Okay, so we now have, this is cat, okay, so meaning a cat, plus plural. Okay, so this idea of a plural marker, that's the S, and we know, like, in phonology, you might write it as a Z or something, so it might be something like, cats with a Z, because it has a plural marker. But you can see, now, like, when you get a word like cats, how do you know that it's two pieces? That's really the thing to get used to. I mean, this is one of the easier ones. I mean, you can see, well, cat is a thing. See, for each piece to stand on its own, for each piece to be a morpheme, usually the clearest test is whether it can stand on its own as a word, or it's something that is combined with many other words. So, cats, okay, well, clearly cat is a word that can stand on its own. So, and cats is, it's not just a coincidence that they sound the same. I mean, cats is, still talking about the same kind of thing that cat is. So that seems like it is the same cat. Like, you can take that piece of that word and you can separate it and say that is a thing. It stands as a thing. And then the S, well, that's left over. So what's this? Well, of course, you can think about all the other words that you can add S, or maybe it sounds like a Z, but you can add, cats and dogs and plants and all the other things that you can add an S to, and they all have the same meaning of plural. And so you you abstract that out. Like, you see, like, well, there's all these different words that end with an S or something that's close to an S, and they all mean plural. So, like, it seems like that is a thing. It's like, it's a wordlet. It's a word piece, and that's what a morpheme is. So you can be pretty confident about dividing this word into two. Now, sometimes it's a little bit less clear, and you can kind of you can be misled by patterns into assuming certain things. You could say something like here, like a series, so which a series, this, and I'm writing it out here phonetically, this, no, I didn't even need to use the phonetic character picker because they're all just regular letters, okay? So, but there it is. So here, like, there is no series. mean, I guess you could talk about Siri, like the personality, the voice of Siri. And so you could actually, I mean, if you were to talk about, if there's Siri, the voice, so series, you could make that as a plural. I don't know if Siri has ever been pluralized, but you could do that. But here in this word series, it is just a single piece because now that S is not the same as this S. It's not being a plural. It's not making multiple Siri. Right? So here it's just one piece. Now you can look at something like, say a word like, you can say scary. Okay, well here, scary, that's like scare plus E, because you can see that scare is a word, okay, and then E is this thing, like you could say like tricky, right? That's like trick plus E, right? Snappy, it's like snap plus E, so it's kind of like saying it's like it, right? Like these are all adjectives, and it's like scary means it's like a scare. Tricky means it's like a trick. Snappy means it's like a snap. And then you get something like happy. Wait, it's like, wait, what? Happy? Wait. Uh-oh. So here you get into this little trap where this is exactly what it looks like. But then what's hap? What's hap? I mean, in each of these cases, you have a clear other word that is then combined with this E ending in order to make the combo word here. So that's two morphemes. But then what's hap? And the tricky thing is that this is usually considered to not be a thing. Is hap a thing? That's kind of the question. Like here, cats. Cat is a thing, but Siri is not a thing. Not like this. Scare is a thing, so we can make it separate. Trick, snap, but then what's hap? Now, so typically this is analyzed as simply being one piece, because the idea is that in an English speaker's mind, there is no separate notion of hap as this thing by itself. But this is a gray area, and there were many discussions back in my morphology class in undergrad where like we'd really kind of challenge the theory here, because who's to say this is not a thing? For example, we have this word hapless. Now clearly this means this is hap plus less, because we have so many words that we can put less, clueless, hopeless. There's all kinds of words that we can put less after, and we know what that means. So hapless means without hap. So it means to be without hap. So if we have, okay, so that gives the idea that, well, what if these are the same thing? And so if hapless is a thing, then maybe hap should be a thing here with happy. Well, the story is that in this case, it goes back into the history of the word, as so much of this does. When you go into the history, you see that there used to be a word called hap. And this word meant something like luck. Okay. So the idea of being happy is like saying lucky. In fact, we can add that one in there, right? We can add lucky. We can add a lucky in here. So that's luck. Right. So lucky means to be with luck. And then happy means to be with hap, as in to be lucky. And it's interesting that we see in many languages that words that have this translation of happy, often they're the same as words that are translated as lucky. So it makes me think about how, there's this big overlap between being lucky and happy. And certainly many languages choose to use the same word in order to express that. You see this with the Latin word felix, meaning lucky, and you see that like in feliz, and many Latin languages have this word for happiness that comes from this idea of lucky. So when we go into history, we see that happy is actually two pieces if you go back into the past. But the usual analysis is that it's now frozen. Okay, so when you're being asked to analyze these things, I always encourage students, go and look into the history of these words and see where they came from, and you can find these morphemes that we don't even think about anymore. But usually, in order to, if you're being asked to determine whether these are really separate morphemes or it's all just one piece, think about whether this is like a living morpheme in the minds of speakers today. Do they think, when they say happy, are they thinking that, it's something that is full of hap, or something that is like hap? And I would bet that no speakers actually think that. Like, happy is just one piece. And this whole notion of being like hap is completely lost to history. And you as a linguist, as a morphologist, can study this and enjoy learning all these secret hidden details of the language. But in terms of the mind of your speakers, your everyday speakers, this is not a thing. The idea of hap is lost to time. Even the term hapless kind of stands as one piece. Like, hapless is, it's not that common a word, and it means to be, unlucky, but even this word, I think, is, even though we can see from the shape that it sounds like you're saying you're without hap, we don't even think about hap, because the whole idea of hap has kind of disappeared and become frozen into these forms. So that's why we'd see happy, we usually see it as one piece. But that's the big gray area of morphology, and there's a lot of room to argue about, well, at what point do you consider one of these antique morphemes? At what point do you consider it to be completely frozen and kind of disappeared from the living language, versus one of these very living pieces, the S or whatever, right? And, you can see an example like perfect. If you go back to the Latin, this actually comes from the word per meaning through, and fect meaning done. And so I always like to use this example. I like to look into these words. It's so interesting to see where these words come from. Whoop, I'm scrolling off there we go. So it's so interesting to look into these words and where they come from, and to see the pieces. And I like this example because we often think about the word perfect as meaning 100% with absolutely no errors. And I think that comes from this whole marking system of how this idea that 100% is this unattainable ideal of absolute perfection, and anything less than that is imperfect. But in the earlier meaning of this word, perfect just means to be done through. In other words, to be complete. And if something is done completely, everything that needs to be done is done, you can consider it to be perfect, even if it's not without any flaw or blemish whatsoever. So this was originally two pieces in Latin, where it comes from, but brought into English. Is there anybody who, in saying this word, has, even in somewhere in their unconscious mind, this idea of these two pieces? No. These two pieces are lost to history, and you can, or they're embedded in history, and you can recover them by studying the history of these words and studying the Latin, and you can see that words like this, they have a history of where they came from, and they originally were composed of these different pieces. These were two different morphemes in Latin, but they have now, that distinction is now lost, and so the word perfect is now only a single morpheme. In other words, perfect equals perfect. And it's all just one piece. And that's what we have now. So one way to test that is you think, well, you know, are there other words that I can make with per? Or other words that I can make with fect? And, you know, you really, even though there are lots of words that include these pieces, other words coming from these Latin words, you can't really combine them in a productive way. They often use the word productive because you can make new words with it in a living, creative way. So these are examples of frozen morphemes. They've frozen together into what is just one piece. So you can see what in Latin was two different morphemes. They were both alive, and they were combined to make this sort of compound combo word of two morphemes. Now in modern English, the word perfect is just one piece, one morpheme. So that's the challenge that you're looking for. Every time you look at a word, you think about how to divide it up, right? And what is possible. You can see how things like the less, like the, you know, things like E and things like the Z here or the S, they can often be separated into separate pieces that you can imagine making other words with. And you'll start to see a common set of some of them that are, you know, very common, like for instance, like un at the beginning, like re, you know, like ness at the end. Like these are very common pieces, li, and many others. You'll start to see these pieces that you can break off words. But then if you can't really find a whole bunch of other words that you can make with these pieces, then chances are it's just a single morpheme. But yeah, that's the beginning of morphological analysis, or studying words, is to choose where do you slice the words. And that's the biggest learning curve when you're starting in morphology.